came to the conclusion for myself, and it's not the truth, but is that money is the form of communication that has completely dominated our society in such a way that you'll always end up with the same result, because it's a form of communication, it's a form of interaction among communities and people, and it's become so pervasive, this particular one type of debt-based money, that nobody can get out of it, not governments, not businesses, not individuals. I mean, you can maybe on very small scales. And so I started inquiring, okay, wait a second, these are the results we're getting from, and I'm not even saying capitalism, I'm saying from actually the structure of money, whether it's socialism or capitalism or it does anything in between, we seem to be getting the same results.
Hello everyone, it's Suzanne Paul on Get Your Sexy Back, and with me today is my friend Grace Rachmani. I've known Grace for a few years. She is one of the most inspiring women and quite alternative women that I know, but I will let her tell you about that. Hi Grace, thanks for joining me today.
Did you just call me a weirdo?
Maybe. Yeah. I did. You are unusual in my experience. I wouldn't class it as weird, but you are definitely not of the norm. That is for sure. So if you want to call it weirdo, go for it. No problem.
Yeah, I walk my own path, that's for sure.
You definitely don't follow the herd. That is what I know about you. So yeah, it's great to have you. So why don't you share with my audience, with everyone watching, how come it is, like, what's so alternative about you? What is that you don't follow the herd in? And then we'll talk from there. Great, thanks.
Yeah, well, I live in Slovenia. I'm Israeli, and I'm originally from the United States. So every quarter of a century, I move to a different continent. I think that might be a little bit different. And where I'm really working, where I'm most inspired, is around the idea of creating alternative forms of economy or alternative forms of communication. And so, you know, we're looking at like the financial system right now, which isn't working for everybody. And we have this idea that like money, there's always been money. It's like you need money to live. We've actually been brainwashed. You need money to live. But you know, money is not like oxygen. It's a creation of human beings. If everyone decided we're not going to use money anymore tomorrow, it would be, we could use something else. But if everybody decided we're not going to use oxygen tomorrow, that wouldn't work, you know. So it's a completely human creation. And so I was starting from there, thinking about, well, if we were going to create something that was the new evolution, right, some new invention, what would that be? And so I teach workshops on that, and I have other people think about it with me, and that's what I'm up to.
And I can tell you that I have participated in Grace's workshops, and they are extraordinarily mind-blowing. And when I did one last summer, so that was in August 2020, it was at 8 o'clock in the morning UK time. So every Thursday I was getting my brain fried at very early in the morning, everyone. Yeah, so what kind of pardon, go on.
It was late in the week, at least it was Thursday.
It was Thursday, so it was later in the week, that's true, but it was still like, it definitely was thought-provoking, what can I say?
Cool.
What is it that what prompted you delving into this inquiry and really looking at why money and why not money like that?
So yeah, so I started with the Arab Spring, actually. I'm Israeli, as I said, and when the Arab Spring happened, I thought, this is great. You know, it's great to overthrow your dictatorship. We all know that's a good idea. But then I thought, but I've got nothing to recommend. Right? Our democracies don't seem to be working that well. And so I got into this inquiry of, well, if I were going to recommend a system of government, if I were going to start from scratch, I think that's what's very different about how I think than other people think. Most people think of in terms of improving something, like what if we were going to get government to be better? And I thought, well, what would better be? First, let me start from scratch. What if there was no such thing as government and we had to think about how to make decisions together as a group? That's what government is. It's making decisions together as a group. Well, what decisions should government make? I mean, certainly today we know there's some decisions that maybe government shouldn't make. Like, should government decide who gets to marry whom and how many people you should marry, right? As long as we're getting on our sexy.
Okay.
But
yeah.
yeah, is that really something we want our government
or
to tell
even
us?
should
Like,
there be marriage? Let's like have that question.
Right. Like, why should government mandate anything about that particular realm? Is that something we need government for? No, I think we need government for the firemen and the policemen. That seems, yeah, that's appropriate, right? So just rethinking from zero. Okay, if there was no government, what would we want to decide together and how we would decide it? And starting from scratch, what would that look like? And then I could say, based on some ideal, which we never reach the ideal, but at least based on an ideal, what would progress look like, rather than fixing something broken? And so I started with that. And that was, I guess 10, 11 years ago when Arab Spring happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in that inquiry. And then maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I got into the cryptocurrency space, which is reinventing money. I mean, that's the definition of what we're doing, except what we invented mostly was money. And it's mostly functions the same way as money. But what I started to realize more and more, and I think all of us have realized, that no matter what government you've got right now, that same guy is in charge. Like, you could interchange most of the heads of states and you'd get the same thing. Whether you have a democracy or a dictatorship, it's like, oh, we could just switch all those guys around. It's like the same dude. Like, how did that happen? And what I came to the conclusion for myself, and it's not the truth, but is that money is the form of communication that has completely dominated our society in such a way that you'll always end up with the same result, because it's a form of communication, it's a form of interaction among communities and people, and it's become so pervasive, this particular one type of debt-based money, that nobody can get out of it. Not governments, not businesses, not individuals. I mean, you can maybe on very small scales. And so I started inquiring, okay, wait a second, these are the results we're getting from, and I'm not even saying capitalism, I'm saying from actually the structure of money, whether it's socialism or capitalism or it does anything in between. We seem to be getting the same results of unequal distribution and power concentration. Again, everywhere. If you go all the way to communism, you get power concentration and gaps in wealth and poverty. Like, it's just the same thing. And so that's when I started rethinking, okay, how would we, if we invented this? And I think the other thing that I've been thinking for a long time is around this idea of financial education. So you'll talk to people and they'll say, we need to financially educate people. And my question is, well, why did we invent something that screws most people? Why would you invent a system that is so hard to understand? If you could invent anything, why would you invent a system that causes most people to do what's bad for them? That doesn't seem like a good system to me.
Yeah.
And then say they need an education because we invented something so complex they can't figure it out.
So I'm curious where I don't even know what to say, because this is just such rich, rich, deep thinking material that I don't even really know what to ask. But where have you gotten to? I mean, I'm curious as to how it's evolved, how your project's evolved, what answers, if any, you've come to, where are you at with it? Because it's just such a big question. Like, that's, I mean, essentially you're basically chucking out what systems saying, like, looking at the systems that we've got and saying, no, we're going to get rid of all of those and like re-examine a whole bunch of new systems. And what is there to say?
Old things die and you want to have a new thing when the old thing dies, right?
Right.
And so I'm not saying we need to get rid of it. I'm saying it's aging and we need to find the new baby and, create a new thing to move into. So I'm not advocating for tear it down. I just want to be clear about that.
Okay. It's not revolution, everybody. Let's be very clear about that.
I'm not saying, but it isn't tear it down. Some things work, right? But it is dying and it is showing its cracks and its weaknesses like old things do. So there's a couple of directions that I've come to. One is this idea that there should be different economic rules within one system. So for example, for things that are not luxuries, things that keep you alive, like food and healthcare and housing, there should be an economy, and the purpose of that economy should not be growth. the purpose of that economy should be preventing people from unnecessary death. Just to be really blunt, right? Nobody should die of hunger today. There's enough food. And so we should create some, and markets aren't good at that. I'm calling that pools, right? In a pool, we all own the pool. We share the pool. It's like if you go to a potluck, right? You go to a potluck and you don't say, hey, that 15-year-old guy, he didn't bring much, but he sure eats a lot. That's just, it's a potluck. You bring what you bring, and you know that 15-year-old guy is going to eat more.
In the way that you participate, yeah.
Yeah, and you don't look at what everybody else is eating. It's just, and so if you considered food in that way, you just make sure everybody had food, and you would want measures that would tell you, okay, how many people in my neighborhood or my community or my country are going hungry, and what do we do about that? And you'd be interested in that number. You wouldn't be interested in GDP. You'd be interested in how many plates were empty today. And so that would be a separate type of economy. And that doesn't mean everything should be shared, but it's like the life support systems, right? What's the most important thing on the Starship Enterprise? It's like the life support systems. Divert the energy to the life support systems before you divert the energy to the torpedoes. Otherwise, it's dead. So that was one of the important things, to say that there could be multiple forms of communication within, and you could still have the market economy for other things. I'm not even saying the market. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've been really interested in, and I don't have a good model for, but I'm trying with what I'm calling a sufficiency currency project, is this idea of a measure that isn't so individual. Like the idea of being able to communicate as a group to another group, rather than as an individual to an individual. Because we are good in groups of not letting anybody starve. If you're in a small enough group that you know everybody, you'll make sure they don't starve, or, figuring out our problems or whatever. As a society, I don't want somebody from the top down telling me what I should do about free riders. Like, I know if that person is a free rider or if they're just going through a hard time. The government should, like some big government should do, but a small community. And then if small communities produce things, and we know that there's certain cities that are good at floor tiles and certain cities that are good at textiles and whatever. And how do you have but none of that happens in a vacuum. The reason they're good at that thing is there's a certain education and a certain environment in that place. And so as a community, it's not like I produced this floor tile by myself. It's really something that happened as a part of my being in an environment. And so then you might say, instead of transacting with you as an individual, we transact with one another as a group. And what would that look like? So I don't have a great model for it because we haven't done that very well in most of our societies. I've been working with eco-villages specifically, but that's been my other inquiry. Like, what if we didn't have individual ways to transact, but only group ways? I mean, in some ways a business is like that, but a business has a different construct.
They're like, because they're specifically for profit. So most businesses, So yeah, okay, interesting. So what's the general response that you've had out in the world, just out of curiosity? Because I imagine, like I said, this is quite eclectic thinking and definitely not of the norm. So I'm just wondering what sort of response you get.
I don't know that there is such a thing as out in the world. And what I've observed is happening in the world right now is that we're having parallel universes. We're having a fragmentation of society. And that's on the political realm, and that's on, all kinds of realms. I don't need to tell British people, like, it seems like some people are living in a totally different world with totally different facts than you, right? And I think that's happening on the economic level as well, and that's happening on a professional level. So in my world, the world of crypto, while a lot of people feel the way you do when they come around to what I'm saying, which is like, oh wow, that blows my mind, or a little bit or a lot, depending on where they are. It's not totally weird thinking in the eco-village world. It's not totally weird thinking in the crypto world. So, but it's not an investment. I mean, the biggest problem is, right, how do you invest in something that is designed not to profit? It's designed to prevent unnecessary death rather than to profit or to grow. It's a really different way. It's much more of a permaculture philosophy. Like, there is no such thing as profit. There's only moving it back into becoming a productive thing for the community it's supposed to be serving.
Interesting. I had another question, but it's completely gone out of my mind. So I'm just going to say, if people watching this, because I think this is a really fascinating subject, and if it has inspired you to find out more or really deepen your understanding of the inquiry that Grace is involved in, or even participate in Grace's specific inquiry, what's the most effective way that people can get in touch with you and find out more about what you're up to and the people that you're associated with are up to?
So I have a weekly call, and you can find out about everything I'm up to at voiceofhumanity.one. So that's just Voice of Humanity, no spaces, no nothing, .one. And there's a weekly call. There's also we're running the course again. So even on the homepage, you'll find a place to sign up. We're running the course again. We're going to do a morning one and an evening one, so people can sign up.
I can recommend the course, everybody. It's really amazing thing to engage in. So yeah.
Yeah, and also it's pay what you want. So if you're under financial stress or whatever, don't worry, just sign up, please come.
Right. Actually, that reminds me, I remembered my question. It was like, have you noticed a shift in thinking in the pandemic? And that's a very long question.
I think I'm going to give you a very short answer. I'm going to give you a short answer. For a long time, certain people have been saying the emperor has no clothes. And now everybody, people are like, yeah, the emperor really has no clothes and he's not that well endowed either. So I think there has been a shift in, you can say these things like something's really wrong and people are like, yeah, we kind of knew it for a long time, but now we're willing to admit it.
Yeah, so there's an acknowledgement that things aren't working. So do you think to an extent that, because there was an acknowledgement like that in the 2008 global financial crisis, but then the system kind of repaired itself and everything went back to copacetic. So do you think that is possibly an outcome of the pandemic, or do you think there's real sustainable change available here in the pandemic?
Sustainable is a little bit difficult, but I actually think we're going to see fragmentation. I think we're going to see that system continue in a kind of phony way, like thinking that it's producing something, but not really like having an economic, but on top of that, people going back to more taking care of one another in communities or moving to their cryptocurrency. I see fragmented markets. I don't think we're going to see this kind of one market again. Yeah, I don't know what to predict, but right now what I'm seeing is people kind of going into these alternate communities and not being willing to depend on the government, and the government trying to crack down. But because of the high level of incompetence of these old systems, I don't think the government will really succeed in cracking down very well. And it'll be more like, as long as it looks good on paper.
Right. So, okay, interesting. So, Grace, I'm sorry to bring it to an end because I do think that's really interesting. You will be able to find more details of Grace's sites that she mentioned in the description of this video underneath. In the meantime, Grace Rachmani, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for literally frying every single one of my brain cells that was still awake. But that's all right. They will regenerate themselves. And I'll see you next time. I'm Suzanne Paul. Bye.